Hey, you guys. I'm not as fun as Granddaddy, but I'm going to read chapter 9 of Treasures in the Snow, and I'm going to read our question and answer for today. So the question is in the awesome book of Bible Answers. Did Jesus know he was God? Many non-Christians agree that Jesus was one of the most important leaders who ever walked the earth. Even non-Christians believe that he lived and that he walked the earth and he was an important leader. And they admit that he was an excellent teacher of right and wrong. And they think that and believe that he was an especially good person. Jesus, however, claimed to be very much more. He said that he was God. Listen to this example, just one of many in the New Testament. Jesus said, "The Father and I are one." John 10:30. The religious leaders understood exactly what he meant. They shouted, "You, a mere man, have made yourself God." They said that in John 10:33. They picked up rocks to throw at him, trying to kill him. To everyone around Jesus, his claim to be God was shockingly clear. And also, I'm going to tell you another time when Jesus claimed to be God. When Moses went up on top of Mount Sinai and God met him there in the burning bush, and God told him to go and be a spokesperson to the people down below. He said, "Who shall I tell them has sent me?" And God said, "Tell them I am has sent you." And so when Jesus stood before the people and he said, "Before Abraham was, I am." When he said that, they knew he was claiming to be God, because this was another time when they were going to pick up rocks to throw at him. And every time he made one of those "I am" statements that you've probably heard of, like "I am the way, the truth, and the life," "I am the door," "I am the good shepherd," all of those "I am" statements in the book of John, every time he made one, he was claiming to be God. Now, Jesus said, "At my Father's direction, I have done many things to help the people. For which one of these good deeds are you going to kill me for?" Which one of these are you going to kill me for? They replied, "Not for any good work, but for blasphemy, because you, a mere man, have made yourself to be God." That was in John 10:32 and 33. Okay. Now, let me mark that place. And I'm going to read chapter 9 of Treasures of the Snow. There's some chapters I can't read because they make me cry. I hope this is not one of them. I don't have any cute little commercials or anything, so you just have to put up with chapter 9 without any cute little commercials or anything. A visit to the hospital. Danny lay in the cart on a sack stretched across a soft mattress of hay, and he gazed up at the blue sky where tiny white woolly clouds floated by. He would have liked to look over the sides of the cart, but this was impossible because he could not sit up. So he looked at the sky instead, and Annette described the scenery and what was happening as they went along. Danny's leg was aching badly, which made him rather bad-tempered. When the cart jolted, he squealed, but Annette spoke to him soothingly to calm him down, and it was still nice to feel so important. "We're at the top of the village now, Danny," said Annette, "just passing the church, and there's Emil, the dustman's son, driving the cows out of the churchyard." The dustman's son. I wonder what a dustman is. I just don't know. "Some naughty person must have left the gate open." "Are the cows trying to go into church?" inquired Danny with interest. "No," replied Annette. "They were trying to jump over the wall, but it was just too high. They were jumping over gravestones instead. Here we are at the infant school, Danny, and there's the teacher scrubbing her steps. I suppose it's her cleaning day, and she's given all the infants a holiday. I wish the schoolmaster had cleaning days." "Oh, here's the teacher coming toward the cart. She has seen us, and I expect she wants to know how you are. And here comes Madame Paulette and Madame Lenore. They have seen us too. They were washing their clothes in the fountain." Annette was right. They certainly wanted to know how Danny was. For in a tiny village, news travels fast and is much talked about and long remembered because there's so little of it. The postman's wife had heard some of the story from Lucian's sister when she phoned for the doctor, and the station master's wife had heard the rest from Marie while she waited for the early train. By now, everyone was talking about it, and everyone wanted to find out more about what had happened. So, Madame Pilette and Madame Lenore left their husbands' shirts bubbling like white balloons in the fountain, while Madame Derez, who kept the village shop, left her counter and came running out with 2 customers behind her. The teacher left her scrubbing bucket to get cold, and they all crowded around the cart and stood on tiptoe to stare at Danny, lying flat on his back on his hay mattress, a little paler than normal, but otherwise quite cheerful and pleased to see them. "Oh, the little cabbage," cried the teacher, throwing up her hands. "You must tell us all about it, Annette." Although they had all heard the story once and repeated it to at least one other person, they were all ready to listen again. So Annette told them all about it, and they shook their heads a great deal and clicked their tongues, and they were all very angry with Lucian. "He's a wicked boy," said the infant school teacher. It's funny that they call school up to the kindergarten or first grade the infant school. "He's a wicked boy," said the infant school teacher. "I shall warn the little children not to have anything to do with him." "And I shall not allow Pierre to play with him," said the postman's wife. "He has a very cruel heart. You can see it in his face. I feel sorry for his mother having a child like that." She thought proudly of her own cheery, freckle-faced son, who was one of the best loved boys in the village. Danny's father flicked his whip rather impatiently and called back that they could not keep the doctor waiting. The women all stood back and the cart lumbered on slowly over the cobblestones. Then they all drew together again and started talking in the middle of the road with their heads very close together. Psst, 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 psst. The cart jolted on and the sun rose higher. The horse didn't mind in the least keeping the doctor waiting, and Annette had plenty of time to describe the scenery to Danny as they made their slow way to town. "The river is almost in flood, Danny," remarked Annette. "It's because the fine weather melted the snow so fast. The water is right over the pine tree roots, and here a tree has fallen right across like a bridge. Oh, Danny, there's a little gray squirrel wondering whether to run along it or not." "Where?" cried Danny, and he forgot and tried to sit up, but he fell back with a squeal of pain. "You can't see," Annette warned him. "Anyhow, the squirrel has run back into the wood." "We're getting near the station now, Danny, and there are 3 cows on the platform waiting to be put on the train." The journey passed pleasantly, and at last houses began to appear, and Annette told Danny they were coming into town. "Tell me all about the shops," exclaimed Danny eagerly. He'd been to the town only 3 times in his short little life and thought it was the most wonderful place in the world. It wasn't much of a town, really, for there was only one narrow street of shops, but they were very nice shops. There was a cake shop with its windows packed with flat fruit tarts and piles of gingerbread cut into every shape imaginable, and the clothes shop with a display of embroidered national costumes. Best of all was the woodcarver shop with its rows of carved cuckoo clocks and the old men who opened their mouths wide and cracked nuts in their wooden teeth. Nutcrackers. At last Father drove up in front of the hospital. It was only a little hospital, really, but to Annette and Danny it seemed enormous. The patients all lay out on sunny balconies, and the door was wide open. Papa jumped down from the driver's seat, tied the reins to the fence, and went in. A few minutes later, he returned with 2 men and a stretcher. Danny, on his stretcher, was laid on a wooden bench in the outpatients' hall, with Papa sitting at his head and Annette down at his feet. The quiet strangeness of the place and the odd, clean smell made them all go very quiet. So Danny watched the nurses instead. They wore long white aprons and lace caps. Danny thought they looked exactly like the angels in Grandmother's big picture Bible. They waited for a very long time. Papa and Annette nodded and dozed. Danny flung his arms above his head and fell into a deep sleep. He was awakened by the doctor, who appeared very suddenly and seemed to be in a great hurry. He was an elderly man with a large black beard and a gruff voice. Annette was afraid of him. Everything seemed to happen very quickly after that. Danny was hustled off onto a trolley, to have the bones in his leg photographed, which was interesting, and he wanted to know whether he would be allowed to keep the photograph to hang up in his house. Then he was trundled back, and the doctor pulled the bad leg until Danny screamed with pain. Then the photographs were brought along, not looking in the least like Danny's legs, but the doctor seemed pleased with them. He studied them deeply and nodded his head wisely. Then he turned to Papa and remarked, "This child needs to stay in the hospital. He has broken his leg very badly," but Papa refused completely. He was not going to leave his little son to this man with his black beard and his rough hands. "We will look after Danny at home," he said firmly. "Surely that's possible." The doctor shrugged his shoulders. "Yes, it's possible, but I think he'd be better here. I cannot come so far to see him. You would have to keep bringing him in." "I don't mind bringing him in," Papa said stubbornly, and Annette put her little hand into his big one and gave it a squeeze. She too wanted Danny at home. The doctor shrugged his shoulders again and spread out his hands. Danny was once more trundled off by a nurse in a great hurry, and this time he did not come back for more than half an hour. When at last Danny was returned to them, he looked sleepy and strange and could remember absolutely nothing but a funny smell. It was Annette who discovered that he had on a big white plaster from his waist downward. She pointed it out to Danny, who stared down at himself in astonishment. "Why have I got to wear these hard white trousers?" he asked at last. Then, without waiting for a reply, he said that he didn't like the doctor's big black beard and he wanted to go home. Annette didn't like it either, and they all wanted to go home. Annette because she was hungry, Danny because he was tired, and Papa because he was thinking about his cows. When the doctor came back with a second photograph, Danny and his family were nowhere to be seen. In the far distance, a sprightly horse was making her way home as fast as possible, pulling a hay cart and 3 passengers behind her. They had completely forgotten to ask when they should bring Danny back again or for how long he had to wear his plaster. They reached home at 5 o'clock, and Danny was put to bed on the sofa so that he wouldn't feel lonely, and Annette slept on a mattress beside him in case he should wake in the night and want her. Here Danny stayed for weeks with his leg on a pillow, and everything was arranged around him. Annette stopped going to school altogether for the time being and almost became Danny's slave. She told him all her stories over and over again and played games with him all day long. Grandmother cooked wonderful little meals in the kitchen to tempt the appetite of the poor little sick boy, whose appetite didn't need tempting at all because he was almost as jolly and cheery and hungry on his couch as he was off it. When Annette was busy, he would lie flat on his back on the veranda bed and sing like a happy lark. That's a bird. He certainly had everything to make him happy. The village saw to that. They had loved his pretty, delicate mother who had grown up amongst them, and when she died, they were all prepared to love her children, especially Danny, who had eyes as blue as forget-me-nots and a voice like a bird, and was altogether as adorable as a 5-year-old could be. Danny, who had always taken love for granted, was not spoiled by it. He was just pleased and excited. For with so many wonderful presents and visits, he hardly missed his freedom at first. The village children wandered up the mountains in search of the first alpine flowers for him until the table by his bed looked like an alpine flower garden. Because Danny loved to see them, Grandmother cheerfully put up with the noise and the muddy boots until the veranda, out of school hours, became a sort of public playground where Danny was in charge. Then there was the schoolmaster who sent fascinating picture books, and the innkeeper who sent brown speckled eggs, and the baker who made golden doughboys with currant eyes, those are like raisins, currant eyes and candied peel buttons. Now candied peel is like they take an orange peel and soak it in like a sugar syrup. So you eat the orange peel and it's real sweet. He used to slip them in Annette's bread basket with a wink, and that was why Danny always insisted on unpacking the shopping basket himself. He never knew what he might find in there. And whatever it was, he was quite certain that it was for him. But the postman was best of all. The Bernier family hardly ever received a letter, so the postman himself decided to write Danny a picture postcard each week, and he trudged up the hill to deliver it himself. He came a different day each week, so every morning Danny got excited in case he should come that day. The postman was never in a hurry, and he always saw to it that the postcard was at the very bottom of the sack. He enjoyed Danny's squeals of excitement as he burrowed among the letters looking for the postcard. And he read the names on all the cards in search of his own postcard. And if the post that day was a little marked and crumpled, nobody ever minded or even asked questions. And that's the end of chapter 9. Goodbye.